Alright, today we've got a BBE Opto Stomp optical compressor in the house. Right now it's in bypass mode and passes signal just fine in bypass mode, and in effect mode there's nothing. So we can already tell cosmetically there's like a loose input jack here, and this screw over here, and this thing must be stripped or something because this doesn't go down that much more. So I'm thinking of just replacing the input jack just at the outside of this thing. Other than that, there's not much on the outside that really stands out to me, so we're just going to open it up and we're going to inject it with some signal and see what we can find.
I'm a fully loaded man and I don't want to be alone, not ever. And I'm starting to...
Hello, so here is the BBE Opto Stomp schematic. I can already tell the schematic's wrong because there's two R6s, but I digress. I'll trust it for the most part. Here we see that there is the power circuit here. We have a series reverse polarity diode, D5 up here, some filtering, but more importantly we have a reference voltage here that's generated by a voltage divider. So we have 46.4 k ohms here, but it should divide equally from 9 volts to 4.5 volts or whatever this is, because this shouldn't be 9 volts because we have a 100R resistor, but I digress. This output should be half of this. And if we look at the TL071, we see that the output is on pin 6 and our pin 4 has our ground. So between 4 and 6 we should have half of whatever is going into this thing at pin 3.
And first, actually, let's check out the supply voltage here. So the supply voltage is 8.6 volts, 8.67. So we should be getting about 4.3 at the half at pin 3. So at pin 3, what we have is 4.33. So it's exactly what we need at pin 3. Now, at the output is pin 6. And pin 6 should give us the same exact reading as that. And we see that we're not getting the same reading. We're getting 6.56. So that tells me that the op amp might be bad. We're going to replace the op amp and we're going to see what we get after that. So just to show the results here, we replaced the TL071 with another TL071. I had a little mishap. One of the pads came off, so I had to put a jumper wire in there. I also found out that the feedback from the output to the inverting input was actually not connected, and that was even before I replaced it. So I connected that also with a jumper wire. Now what we see between the negative power pin and the output, let's put this back on, I don't know if you could see that from over there, is the output should be 4.3 volts, which is exactly half of what we had going in, and that's showing up in other places on the circuit as well, which is very good, because earlier we were getting a ton of like 6 point something volts. It really wasn't ideal to be a bias voltage. So it seems like that's all set. Let's try and see if the pedal works now. So we got it all hooked up again, and well, still no output. Still no output. Just as a nice little, that's bypassed, and still no output. So we got to do a little bit more digging here.
Hello all, so the BBE Opto Stomp optical compressor is now repaired. I just wanted to go through a couple problems that I was having on it and how I knew how to solve them. So one of the problems with this PCB board is the component holes are a bit small, and there's traces on both sides of the PCB. So when you have a lead that's so small, or when you have a hole that's so small and the lead goes through, what you're relying on is the solder on one side to seep through the hole and also connect to the copper layer on the other side. So if you have traces on both sides of the board, you rely on that to be able to make a connection. So What I found was that sometimes you couldn't rely on the via on the plated through hole, which we'll go through in a second, to connect one side of the board to the other. So here's a description of the plated through holes. And on one side of the board, now this right here is a pin, let's say from a resistor or some sort of component. And here's the pin, and on one side we have copper, and on the other side we have copper, but through this hole here we have it's plated on the inside, hence a plated through hole. And what happens when you solder one side is that you rely on the solder to seep through the hole and also connect to the copper on the other side of the board. What I was finding with this BBE Opto Stomp is that wasn't reliable. So what I had to do was make jumper wires in some instances and connect something to something, especially the switch, the toggle switch. That was quite hard to navigate around. But you know, using jumper wires worked like a charm, and it was totally fine. Another pro tip I wanted to go over is is a common problem that I see sometimes. So let's say you had a chip, and let's say additionally that you had a TL072 op amp, so dual op amp. That means that your pin 4 down here is your ground, and your pin 8 up there is your power. Now, if you have no ground connection, for example, so this thing is supposed to be connected to ground, correct? So this thing should have a connection to ground like that. But let's say that doesn't exist, but you have a connection to power. So you have, like, let's say plus 9 volts and connection to power like that. What's going to happen is you're going to see close to 9 volts at every single pin on this chip except for the ground. You might even see it on the ground pin. I'm not really sure. Well, you're not really making connections. So yeah, you'll probably see it on the ground pin as well. The reason for that is because you now have a floating potential. So if you're measuring each of these pins from where you know that ground should be somewhere else in the circuit, you will see a common voltage across all these pins of 9 volts. It is very important that when you see the same type of high power supply voltage on each pin on an op amp or any sort of IC, it's very important that you check the continuity of your ground pin with where you think ground should be in the circuit. When you connect this back to ground, then you should see everything come back to normal. If you don't see things come back to normal, then your op amp might be bad. Or you have a general ground problem on your board. It's tough to say. It's really relative to your situation, but this is what happened to me on this BBE Stomp pedal. So just a pro tip for something in the future, you might want to know that. So that's it for a description of what I found wrong on this pedal.